Hi Bailey, taking a look at your work here. Like I said, I think this is going really strong. I'm just going to go into it and name some of the things I think that are catching my eye. And one of the things is this little move here on the shoulder, right? So I like that the weight is on this arm and that this arm looks like it's positioned on the knee. When you do this head turn here, it doesn't make sense to me that the arm drops down. And maybe the arm also, it looks like maybe it's being cut here a little bit by the knee, so it looks like it's moving. And maybe something you can do is introduce some movement here to this torso, right? Which feels like, whoa, did not mean to do that. Let's see, how do I get back to, okay. So some movement on this torso when she turns her head. So how would you want that torso to turn? I'm not entirely sure. Maybe I would drop this shoulder here so that you're going from something like this to something maybe just a little bit more down. And the real trick when you do this is to try to keep this shoulder here sort of like a pivot point. So because this is like, let me use a cooler color. This is where all the weight is on her arm, and it's sort of like, you know, it's pushing her torso up here, that when, if she, so I would just kind of track a point like here, make sure that's staying like relatively the same. If you drop down, if you kind of like give a rotate down on this torso, just to kind of accompany that head turn. Maybe you don't want it to go down, maybe you want it to go up, maybe you want it to do something else. That is fine too, because this head turn doesn't super rotate, it kind of like drops. Now that I think about it, let's see, is that what I would, yeah, it's fine. So we're looking at something like this here, and here we're looking at something like this here. What I would do maybe with this head thing is just maybe scooch the nose over a bit more, so we do get a sense that it's like turning a little bit, not just dropping down and everything. These are just suggestions, you can take them or leave them, but the real thing is like how that arm is moving and how the torso isn't moving. So I kind of want the arm to not be moving and the torso to be moving. If the weight is like on this elbow, then it should act like a cantilever. Like this is like the structure that's holding up this mass here. And so if this mass is going to rotate or do anything, it's pinned here. Like that's kind of the thing we want to be pinned. So then in the next frame, you could go to something kind of like whatever you want, but the idea is that this arm and that pin sort of remains somewhat stable, you know? This whole thing, like the arm here, this can like have a little bit of arc rotation to it here, or it could go back here, or whatever you're doing, but really like that should be the indicator of that her weight is on that arm when she turns her head. It's pretty specific, I know, but it's just where we're at because this thing is coming along great. I'll talk about in-betweens and suggested in-betweens in a little bit. Let me mark some of these key pose changes. I'm just going to say it's there even though that's not where you first introduce it, so why don't I do it correctly instead of just arbitrarily. There, 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 oops, sorry, this part is the boring part. There, 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 cool. I'm not going to focus on the eye stuff quite yet. Cool. Okay, cool. So now I got your poses. All right, so I started doing all this because this hand here felt a little odd to me because it kind of like comes over and then goes back. And that feels maybe like a little bit complicated. So maybe you kind of want to in between it, between this pose or this position here and this position here. So where would that be? We don't have enough frames here with our little friendly ghosty McGhost face. All right, so you know that in between looks like it'd be somewhere like around here. I'm sure you can get that sorted, but that's kind of my suggestion, you know. All this is nice, but I want to see a little bit of movement again of the torso here. I'm just going to write it because things are moving, but the torso isn't. There should always be a little something with the torso. So a suggestion, do what you want. Maybe this isn't the right thing here, is that we have her like this, and then she goes to look down at the nails, so maybe the gesture can support that. I wouldn't have her lean into the nails. I would have it do the opposite of that. How come I'm not seeing any of the drawings? Not enough. Is that, did I max out at 25? Oh, consider all frames. Only sketches. Alright, well, whatever. Maybe just have her lean away. You know, so the head's going this way, like I said, but the torso goes this way. And it doesn't have to be massive, just a little bit. You know, I don't think my drawing is hugely inappropriate. You know, might bring some stuff over with it a little bit, like the hands and whatever. But we need activity on that torso, because otherwise you're going to notice once we get into spline it and stuff. And the same is true here. If she starts to go up, maybe you can have the torso do a little rotate back in Z depth kind of thing along with the head. This is nice here, so maybe you could also, instead of having it go back in Z depth, you know, start to like rise up into this next pose, like start in betweening that. Cool. Like this little move on the torso here, perfect. That's all I'm really kind of looking for out of this stuff. It's just a little tiny bit of keep alive. And if you really want to, I think you should, like a little keep alive like this, you kind of want to represent that a little bit on the hips. Now the hips are going to move even less than like a torso move like this would. But if she's like, oh yeah, you got the legs swinging out here, but I'm still kind of seeing the silhouette of this kind of remain perfectly the same. So I don't know if you're moving the legs or if you're actually like rotating her torso, but see if you can just get a tiny little something. Maybe you just lean it over just a tiny little bit so that it moves just a little bit when her torso goes this way meaning like to the right. Then maybe the hips that were like this need to go just kind of like that. Just tiny little changes, but it's going to really keep this stuff alive. And I'm not saying you have to do that on every hip pose, but I am saying you have to do it on every torso pose. The hip poses should only react when like the torso does kind of major weight shifts, and the hips and the torso though should kind of do it all the time. So if she's going up into this shoulder shrug, it sure would be nice if she's shrugging there to have her center just go up just a little bit to kind of like support that, kind of feel it all tied together like a living character, right? So it should be this line and not just staying the same as this bottom line, if that makes sense from all my crazy drawings. Here's a shoulder shrug, really nice. She drops the shoulders. The same thing should happen in the torso. Just give it a little drop. Yeah, so if you have, I don't know if you're doing this in FK or IK, let's say that you're doing an FK and you have 3 controllers like this, you can take all 3 controllers and just move them down the teeniest bit. Maybe you don't need all 3 controllers. Maybe you're doing an IK though, which means you're really shaping everything with just this top controller here. And if that's the case, then just drop the top controller down and it should kind of shrink and grow the length of her torso ever so slightly to kind of support those moves. You know what I mean? I find, you know, like I would pick kind of like a hand position or a hand pose when her hand is like resting. That actually isn't too bad, but I feel like the fingers are kind of dancing around a lot. What I'd rather see is, like, let's say if this is your hand pose that you like, I like both of them sort of equally. You know, if you want to have this elbow swing out like you are, maybe this pose you just rotate the hand, the palm of the hand, so like where the wrist meets the hand out, but you kind of leave these pinned there. That's a cartoon of a pin. So you're kind of pinning the front of these fingers here in place, but you're just slightly rotating out the back as like that would be in this pose. So all the purple stuff should happen here. And not here. I was just using this as an example of the pin and everything. And you can give like these subtle little movements will make everything feel like super nice and alive. Like you're kind of doing it here, which I like. Like let's say this is where you want to choose your anchor to be, and this is where your palm is. You're kind of like almost lifting up the palm and leaving your anchor still. I'm not entirely sure that that's what's going on, but that's kind of the right idea, right? Is that you're just getting these tiny little micro changes, but it's gonna feel awesome. Now this move here on that hand, it feels like the hand's being pulled back maybe in space. And so what I would really try to do is put your pin here on these knuckles and keep those knuckles in the same spot between both of those frames. And again, this is really tiny nitpicky stuff. This is cool. I'd love to see a breakdown here of how the hand gets over here. It's fine if the hand gets there first, but maybe, you know, think about like starting to lead with the hand. How does that hand move to get over here? Like, does she pick it up and kind of drag it like this, which is not in proportions to your character, but whatever. We're gonna pretend like I can draw for a brief, beautiful moment. You don't want to make it too dissimilar from like where you're starting to where you're going, but there can be a lot of character defined in these in-between moments. So I want you to just think about that as you keep moving forward with this with breakdowns. That's really nice. I feel like here, maybe unbreak this wrist a little bit and have it kind of more straight armed here, because this angle feels a bit too extreme being this angle. So maybe just like rotate this down to straighten that out. This is nice, but it feels like you're getting into this hand pose like maybe a little early, a little premature. I don't know if you have a tweener. If you don't have a tweener, or tween machine or something, talk to me about it in class, and we can arrange that. Now I'm loving this little movement in the hips here. Gold star, this is what I was kind of talking about before, so you know. And what I love about it too is it feels like this side of the hips is taking the weight, right? If you look at like this right here, this almost looks like a pin. That's kind of like where you're rotating around. Really great. That's exactly what I'm talking about. We gotta like pepper those little adjustments, and even this little adjustment on the hip, phenomenal. I'm loving it. Now I think we could do something here with the head, because this, and this feels like a little even with how it's getting there, you know? So maybe instead this character is like dragging her head a little bit, so the angle is going to be more similar to the first frame. That's a possibility. Another possibility would be to drag it even more. So like if this is the first frame, maybe you try to just match. Jeez, I'm gonna get a new color. Ooh boy, because everything's getting real sloppy in there. So it could even be as dragged as this. Not as dragged as this, because I just matched the exact same angle. But what I'm trying to say is, like if we pick this spot in the crown of her head, we're gonna try to keep the head angled sort of like at that. So that's something you can do. I'm not sure if that would look good in this case. It might look good. It's kind of for you to play around with and see. That is probably not her ear or where her ear would go at all. And I'm not sure if this is going to be visible at all. But yeah, so you can drag it to this extreme of the yellow, or just kind of bias it more towards that first pose, and then it can wind up here. However you want to define that move, just make sure that moves aren't like real even. So this is something that I think is the biggest thing that caught my eye out of the whole piece. Maybe I should have started with it, but this shoulder dropping down and that one coming up feels really kind of unnatural to me. So I am looking at your reference to kind of figure out where that's coming from, because to me this shoulder stays level. Like this might be an example of a pin, like kind of what I've been talking about, where this is like kind of being pulled because this hand hasn't gotten like motion yet, right? But I also am not sure that I'm feeling that this shoulder comes up. So if you're going to have this shoulder come up, I would also have this shoulder come up. Now I know you've already done like a shoulder shrug, so maybe that doesn't feel correct to you, or maybe that's not an acting choice you want to make. I can totally get behind that if that is the case, but we got to figure something else out than one shoulder going up and the other one going down. There's also, again, I would put movement on this torso to kind of support whatever it is that you land on here. So I'm not going to give you a solution necessarily for that, but I am going to identify a problem. This kind of torso movement and hip rotation is excellent. And all of this feels excellent, how she's like leaning over here and going down. This may be like here you're kind of like leading with the crown of the head, which is fine. But it goes over and then it goes down. We can talk about that more when we get more into like specific breakdowns and stuff. I want to play it one more time just to take a macro view of the acting choices and everything.
What's your deal? I haven't seen you before.
Oh, yeah, I just transferred. Yeah, I just transferred. I honestly, like, I guess you could say I'm kind of like a wayward soul who's finding myself.
Yeah, what's your deal?
Cool.
I haven't seen you before.
Oh, yeah, I just transferred.
What I'm wondering is if that shoulder shrug feels a little late to me.
I haven't seen you before.
Oh, yeah, I just transferred.
Feels like maybe just a little late getting into it, so maybe you want to like bump some of these poses earlier to kind of get the shoulder shrug, maybe just a scooch earlier. Listen to it with that idea in mind and see what you think. You can always slide entire poses around to retime it.
Yeah, I just transferred. I honestly, like, I guess you could say I'm kind of like...
Okay, so this move here, where she goes from right to left, feels a bit slow when I play it.
Honestly, like, I guess you could say I'm kind of...
Yeah, okay, so this is what I think. You get over into this and it almost immediately goes up, kind of all at like the same timing. So it's like bump, bump, and then it goes up. What I would do is take the lean over poses, the three, I'll call them lean right poses. I would tighten up that timing. That means just put them closer together so that you can stay in the far right pose here, okay, with the frames that you've saved. So you want to hold this a little bit more so that she can like rest and live in this. And I'm not talking about a ton, maybe just like, so let me think, what would I guess?
I guess you could say I'm kind of like aware.
Yeah, so hold in this one just for a beat more. I don't know what the numbers here are, Bailey. Whatever. I'm not telling you what to do. You live your life. So this is like 6 frames. That's like 11 frames. I think I would definitely probably do this like 4 and 4. So this will be 8 frames after. So it's 273 to 277. So let's do it like this. This is a guess. I have no idea. And then 281 are the lean overs. And that'll give you... That can't be right. Is my math right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, maybe that's terrible. Maybe that's not the right numbers at all. 281, 289. Yeah, that can't be right. Oh my gosh, I hope you didn't do them yet. That would be disaster. Let's say that it's 8. We're going to do 8, 281, and 289. Yes, 289. Because that would be like way back here. So that would give you like 13 frames hold. See how that feels? I'm just guessing. I don't know. I can't imagine. I can't animate in my imagination perfectly.
A wayward soul who's finding myself. Soul who's finding myself.
Yeah, I think that's all working really strongly. I think these poses are nice. You know, if you haven't already, you know, we got to do cleanup stuff. Like that penetration there, no biggie. You know, some of this hand stuff may be a little too active. I think that you would be able to kind of plant the hand mostly here, and it wouldn't need to adjust so much. I do like little adjustments on the hand, but again, I would look to like pin it somewhere and then just do like tiny things like that. Not always the easiest to execute because there are no pins in most rigs, so you may have to like, you know, what would this look like if I was doing it? How would I achieve that? I would have to, you know, you rotate it at the knuckles and then you counter rotate it at the wrist to kind of make the shapes and the changes that you need to try to kind of pin the fingertips or pin this row of knuckles kind of in space. Hopefully that makes sense. But yeah, like this, you know, that feels like extraneous motion. So if this is IK hands, which I hope it is, just like copy the pose over. This feels really nice, how it rides up with the leg and all that stuff. This feels like it's not swimming around too much. So yeah, that's just like cleaning up some of these poses and start figuring out your breakdowns of how you want to get from pose to pose, you know. This is really strong stuff. Okay, so I'm going to look at the eyes for 2 seconds. Oh, we're 25 minutes.
I
Holy
haven't seen you
cats.
before.
Oh, yeah, I just transferred. Yeah, I just transferred. I honestly, like, I guess you could say I'm kind of like a wayward soul who's finding myself.
Yeah, what's your deal? I haven't seen you before.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's it. I will maybe use this, if you don't mind, to get a little demo on like designing good eye shapes and stuff in class. I want to start talking about that and eye masks and everything else. But anyways, that should be plenty to chew on, especially at this late time. So I'm going to call it there. But great stuff. Keep going. I'm trying to talk to you more about like concepts of how to get from pose to pose and stuff. Now that you have stronger poses, just like little ways of introducing some overlap and some offsets and some breakdowns. So yeah, hopefully that stuff comes through in the level and specificity of notes I'm giving you. But it has nothing to do with saying like, oh my gosh, look at all these drawings. It must be awful. It is not. Yeah, all right. See you in class.